Hey, welcome everybody to not a No State Project show, but more of a wrap up, kind of a nostalgic or post mortem, if you will, just talking about some of the how the show started and what was accomplished, where it went, and those who were very helpful in bringing the show about and continuing it, and of course, somebody who was very instrumental to that is on the line. We're going to be discussing things. The Calvin is going with, so we're going to do a kind of a recollection and talk about the No State Project over the years. Welcome, Calvin. Glad to do this with you.
Well, Marc, great to join you. I've kind of been in the background for a while now, but I saw on my feed that you did one final salute. Watched it. It caught my eye because most of your recordings are over an hour for the show. So I said, well, what's this about? And when I learned you were closing shop, I thought to myself that, I think this is more deserving of a more honorable retrospective, really covering the full breadth of your work, because I think within the community, the anarchist and libertarian community, especially with activists, your show has a very unique resonance, and I don't think anyone is bringing about legal defenses and strategy quite the way you are, unfortunately, because in court, what matters most or should matter most are facts. And so many legal eagles or theorists or lawyers tend to stick with legal interpretation. So when I came across your work and it stuck truly on the Boolean nature of whether or not facts actually exist to substantiate a case, it really caught my ear. And after that first exposure, a decade later, it really changed my life, of my perspective, how I validate things in life. And it really helped me build a philosophical foundation for everything moving forward. So I have to say, first and foremost, thank you for putting out your work for the rest of the world to digest and think about. And with that said, I think we should really start from the beginning on how you got started on your journey towards where you eventually landed. And I haven't really checked in on this perspective of where you're at these days, but how would you describe yourself? Do you still primarily describe yourself as a voluntarist, anarchist? What flavor of philosophical persuasion do you most identify yourself these days?
I'm an anarchist. There's no question about that. I mean, I've caught a lot of heat, people thinking that I'm not, which is one of the reasons why I ended the show when I did. I can take criticism of the work, and but people say, with just these ridiculous comments that people would post and go out of their way to tell me they're unsubbing. But anarchist, and I've always said that the philosophical, what attracted me and why I'm an anarchist is the ethical aspect of it, in that live honestly, injure no one, give every man his due, but that applies to everybody. And when you and the idea that the audacity, right? Oh my God, that it should apply to everybody across the board. That's why I'm an anarchist, and not everyone agrees with that, and that's that. But it's anarchist.
So you're an anarchist. When did you first, and you backtrace your steps, and when you first dipped your toes and found anarchy, what were the circumstances that surrounded you coming and onboarding to the libertarian and anarchist philosophical platform?
Well, it was getting involved with libertarians and in court and the so-called patriot. That pricked my interest, and researching that and seeing that there was so much dishonesty in law, and even the people that were trying to point out that the so-called woke cult, that uh, they were, the patriot types, the ones that in the 90s, and uh, finding out they were just as dishonest. And so my principle was, again, live honestly, injure no one, give every man his due, and it applies to everybody. And that's got to be the defining factor. So it was just happenstance that when I'm having all these disagreements with people, somebody had a copy of Lysander Spooner's The Constitution of No Authority, and no treason, the Constitution of No Authority. And the first page or two just blew my mind, because yes, somebody gets it. It was nice to know that that there were a lot of other people around, because you live in your little bubble, and I wasn't doing a radio show at the time, and so you have your little bubble, and most people don't think that way. So it was kind of eye opening. And to realize, I don't mean to cast dispersions, but yeah, there's a lot of dishonest people out there. Well, as you guys already know.
Well, in a dishonest environment, Spooner really speaks to the core of truth. So I could definitely see how stumbling across that would inspire you to look for more logical consistency within the libertarian, anarchist, and especially the legal activism and effective damage control circuits. So when you apply the logical consistency that Spooner offers, but can also be found elsewhere in other libertarian and anarchist publications, that really does set a solid groundwork for cross-applying that not only to law, but many different facets of life. One of the things that you shared with me was moving towards a plant-based or vegan diet, and that is essentially lining your ethics up with your with other, crossing other things in life. So these principles are very valuable, and even proven more valuable where you could apply them elsewhere. So I definitely understand how that happened. One of the publications that you pointed out to me that really resonated with me was Harold Thomas's Myth of the Innocent Civilian. Really resonated with me, and really pushed me to actually do something, go into court and challenge these prosecutors' baseless claims. Not that every time it quote unquote worked like magic, as some people claim it would, but it was a form of effective damage control. And I also would like to point out, it was always a win in that the prosecutor was never able to actually answer the questions of fact that you were putting towards them. So when I kept seeing that repeat itself, regardless of whether it was a dismissal or not, that really spoke to me, and it really affirmed the value of facts when forming a position or opinion, or in the prosecution's case, asserting allegations. And that really took me for a ride for a long time. And I think towards the end of it, after a decade, what you had said multiple times on your show, and to quote a movie, is the only winning move is not to play. So, if you want to lessen the violence that the state brings forth, then you also have a role to play in that you can conduct yourself in a way that doesn't invite them, that doesn't turn their head to look your direction. So now these days I try to my best just to, not gain their attention. That being said, being a new mover to Keene, I do have a parking violation that I'm currently challenging. So this should be interesting. It's been, maybe 3 years or so since I've walked in a courtroom having to defend myself. So
Nice.
The principles, yeah, absolutely. And it was really effortless, but nonetheless, here I am, and I'm going to have to kind of jog my old rusty memory. But it's just a few principles cascading in court. So it's really not hard to pick back up where you left off because, of course, the questions are very simplistic and direct, and it's just whether or not the prosecutor could actually provide the facts that you're requesting. So, but anyhow, that's a far cry from Harold Thomas's The Myth of the Innocent Civilian, but he really demonstrated that everyone has a role in the violence of the state, and everyone has an effect on how that violence is manifest. So, there are ways to reduce their attacks and to persuade them not to target you. Not that you should put that off on anyone else, but conduct yourself in a way of peace, and maybe peace will find you. So, that's that. And so, let's see, looking through my notes here.
Well, just to throw out logical consistency, some of us more than others, you seek to live more logically consistent with your beliefs. Of course, living in the world that we do, it's not really possible to be, I think, 100% ethically consistent. Ethics involves choice. So it is tough. It is tough. I mean, even getting in, starting a new business that I've been doing, which is still not taken off yet, things being the way they are, there are opportunities to be where you can make a lot of money if you are unethical, if you are immoral. You can make a tremendous amount of money. I could have taken advantage easily of the trust that people had in me when they came to me for problems up until just, February of this year. And I could have made a small fortune, but that's not the right thing to do. I mean, you got to live with yourself. And getting into this other business, I realize that every business has unethical actors, but oh my gosh, I can't believe the cesspool most businesses tend to be. And that's why when I see someone who's really successful, that I know it's a bias, but I know knowing how these people operate and being immersed in this other business and seeing it again firsthand, it's just as dishonest as any other business or the law or the courts. It's a cesspool. So I know the what people like to say. It's just business. So because it's business, you could be unethical, but that's what they do, which is really unfortunate. And I'm glad you mentioned Harold Thomas, because that book, The Myth of the Innocent Civilian, that really, that was a great book. I had Howard on the show a number of times, and I've met him personally, and he's been to some of the workshops when I used to do that, and good guy. And so if he happens to stumble upon this video, definitely you can still get me at markstevens@mail.com.
All right. And moving along here, I'm curious, has your philosophical position changed from the point that you first described yourself as an anarchist to today, all these years later? Have you shifted, or do you have any differences in your initial beliefs and where you are now?
As far as the principle has not changed. I think I've had that principle most of my, since I was a teenager, to live honestly, injure no one, give every man his due. Basically do unto others, treat others the way I want to be treated. That part hasn't changed. I think what may have changed is my attitudes towards government along the way certainly changed. Being able to admit that, contrary to what some people think, that self-proclaimed anarchists and voluntarists think that just because it's a criminal organization, that literally 100% or 99.9% of everything that government employees and politicians say is completely false and fabricated, and that's just faulty thinking. I probably at one point have talked about that and said, well, if their lips are moving, they're lying. The thing is that not everything politicians or the media says is false. A good portion is, and that's why you have to look for multiple sources. So I think it was, getting to be, sticking more to the principles of logic that led me to change my belief that almost everything they say is false. It's not. And that's, that makes it more difficult to do. It's more difficult to deal with them knowing and accepting the truth that not everything they say is false. So that is one of the major changes that had to come about in as far as my perspective on government. And also getting more in line with someone like Ian Freeman, who we'll talk more about, because I was hardcore against all voting, period, end of discussion. If you're doing that, then you're supposed. And listening to Ian and knowing Ian and following how he and some others and Keene have voted, or went to be elected. They ran for office up there for local offices. And then, that helped change my perspective, and because you got to conform to the facts. And then seeing someone like Larry Krasner, who may be a county attorney, but he's actually doing some good, and he's following through on what he wanted to do. And hey, can you really complain about a prosecutor who gets, a defense lawyer who was elected to be the district attorney, and 31 career prosecutors are either fired or resign? And then 9 people, since I last checked on it, 9 innocent people were vindicated and released from prison. So that's another change in the perspective, and someone like Ian was instrumental to that.
Wow, interesting. So at what point did Socratic questioning enter in with your basic line of questioning with prosecutors as a form of defense? Because I find that very effective as far as getting to the facts of a case. But was that always present since the beginning of your work, or did that come in afterward? And at what point did did that really become very pertinent in the formation of the line of questioning?
Well, the Socratic method really came along. I remember writing in Adventures of Legalland because it was something that, yeah, you get touched on in school about the Greeks in philosophy. But my kids were just asking why, what about this and what about that, and then together with someone like Jerry Spence, seeing a few clips of Jerry Spence and realizing the power of not necessarily taking a position, but just asking leading type questions to bring out whether or not somebody is making a valid argument or not. And it really came into effect when you actually are discussing things with people who are probably much more educated and smarter than you, but are not necessarily making good arguments. And you get to court and you're discussing these things, and you're cross-examining a police officer. Jumping in, you through experience, you start you see the power of not necessarily taking a position and putting forth an argument, but first questioning, and then once you have more facts and you have a broader context, then actually putting forth an argument. But when you are able to go in and ask just a few leading questions and have a prosecutor screaming objection when the cop should be able to answer, yeah, that's pretty powerful. So that was a big thing, actually going into court or discussing things with professionals.
And so now we're getting into the questioning technique, which I want to back up and get back to the principles that these techniques were built upon. That being said, I really like the definition of anarchism is rules without rulers. A lot of people they want to reject anarchism because they believe in rules, and they falsely believe that anarchists do not believe in rules, and that nothing could be further from the truth. And making that distinction was very powerful in affirming my personal belief in anarchism. I was an anarchist before, but that distinction really solidified, the validity of anarchism in my life. So, that's one principle. But what are the main principles of anarchy that really define it for you? And also, what are the main objections that you've found that you've had to overcome in some of the basic responses to overcoming such objections to personal freedom?
Well, I think a lot of the backlash or people not liking anarchy or anarchists, of course, is a misunderstanding. But self-proclaimed anarchists don't really do themselves a favor, especially I'm talking about the vocal ones. And every now and again, you'd get one that would come onto the show. And so I'm thinking of one in particular from a number of months ago where people think that voluntarism or anarchy, and I'm talking self-proclaimed ones, which then, of course, they spread this misinformation on the people that it's an F you, I got mine. I have no responsibility to you. You have no responsibility to me. F you, I've got mine. And that's not what anarchy is. Anarchy, at least in what my understanding is, it's grounded in ethics. It is, again, to repeat it's treating others the way you want to be treated. You may have a so-called, let's say, a right to life, liberty, and property, but so does everybody else. And so the idea that you having a right to liberty, that doesn't carry any kind of responsibility, it never worked for me. And so anarchy, yes, is no rulers, and that there's no violent ruling class, but there's certainly rules because, again, it's an ethical position. Is because you break it down, like, why don't we believe in having rulers? Because having somebody violently rule over you violates the basic principles of right and wrong. It violates the principle of do no harm. That's why, because it's an ethical issue. It's violating the ethics. So to come in and self-proclaim yourself as an anarchist, that you have no responsibility to other people and nobody has any responsibility to you, it's not an ethical position, and so it doesn't square with anarchy. If you want to say "Aba fangul ho mio," you're not an anarchist. You're just a douche. That's not what anarchy is. And then so that's why when you get some objections to it, it's because I don't think they understand it. And a more nuanced argument or a more valid argument against anarchy is where people believe that it's justified that somehow because I can't remember the philosopher's name. Wrote Leviathan. I could put that in the video. Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes. That it's necessary, that it's a necessary evil, that even though the basis of government is unethical, you have to do it because the alternative is the brutish life. That's just a misunderstanding. There's no valid reason why the services that we have in a civilized society have to be provided in a criminal, unethical manner. So I'm able to overcome objections, and the way I've done it is to get to a point of agreement with people in saying that, look, like I used to say, should a service or product be provided at the barrel of a gun? And I think I refined it by asking if I was to act in the same manner. Again, it's a much better leading question, much better question. If I was to act in the same manner as those called government, and I forced everybody in the community to give me money, even under the pretense I was going to help them, would you still consider me a criminal? And everyone always says, the honest one, well, yes, of course. Well, if we want logical, ethical consistency, if I'm a criminal for doing it, then everybody is a criminal for doing it. And so we have a criminal. So doing it in that way and drawing on people's agreement the way they already believe, because most people will, I think, agree that they don't want to be hurt. So, of course, to be logically consistent, they shouldn't hurt other people. So that's how I've overcome those objections. But
and I, for one, don't find anything wrong with holding people to their own stated principles. And that's essentially all that's going on when you ask them where they stand on a certain position and getting their principle down and then applying that until you find inconsistencies. And then not that there aren't inconsistencies and paradox in life, there are, but to the extent that we allow them to become abusive and destructive in society, that's when they must be examined and, and determine whether or not they are actually necessary. And to rebut a little bit of Tom Hobbes, and, Calvin and Hobbes have a very special place in my heart. And Bill Watterson talked about that a lot, that he crafted his characters around the philosophies of John Calvin and Thomas Hobbes. So it's interesting you bring him up. But the whole argument about life would be too horrific without government, I would argue the opposite right now, is that because of government, because of the massive welfare state, they've made life so comfortable that we're living beyond our means. We're living in a state of vanity. And because we live in this unicorn economy where nothing is pegged to anything tangible, what that allows for is a lot of abuse, not only morally, but on resources. So it's because of Tom Hobbes' position and outlook that without government, life would be so horrible. I say with government, life has become too easy and we become blind to the true nature of the, of the terror of government and other abusive systems of control. So, just to kind of rebut against Tom Hobbes in his assessment of why he believes government is necessary. I think we have a firm understanding of the principles that really guide a lot of your work. Let's get into a little bit of your work. Tell me a little bit of the history and the craft that went into writing your first publication, at least that I'm aware of, that being Adventures in Legalland.
I actually had written something else because some of the people that I was working with at the time that I was contracted with, because I had gotten started helping people, in doing tax and traffic stuff. And I was just doing it in Gilbert, Arizona. And some people heard that I was having success. I was still going to school. So I had no intention that wasn't the intention of my life. It just sort of happened. And they thought that I should write a book, and they thought it should, write a book and do it this way. And because of some factors, I decided to not provide the manuscript, not provide it, because I did not trust the people that I was working, and I went up going out on my own. And I had been doing some workshops, and somebody floated the idea. He actually wound up doing some of the editing on it. hey, why don't you write, based on what I was talking about at this workshop, you should write a book about this stuff. Yeah, so I started writing down, because I have all these files and all these people I'm working with from all over the United States and a couple few in Canada. I just decided to put the principles and back them up with real life examples. So everything in the book, as far as when it's fairly easy to tell, I'm talking about a real person. I'm talking about a real case. uh, I was able to use that to back up the principles that I was talking about, and do it in a very conversational manner, like I was doing a workshop. Try to keep people entertained and interested. I could talk a lot about the book, but there's so much more we need to get into. But it was like anything else connected with doing the show. There were issues and difficulties, and it took me 6 months to find an artist to do the cover here in Mesa, and I wanted to use a real judge, and I was going to use Brian Strong. And so anybody can go and you can see what Brian Strong looks like, and you can tell why. So it's very similar to who eventually became, I did use as the model. I wanted a particular look for the judge, and I wanted Brian Strong because he just struck me as just comical. Anyway, and so after I told her, oh, here, this is patterned after an actual judge, and then she said, holy crap, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to caricature a real judge. So I wound up going with someone else, and I'm glad I did, because Z had the facial hair that made it a little more ominous and creepy looking. Not that he is, of course. And so that worked out, and I think the basic principles that I laid out there, I still use today, and right up until through government indicted and whatnot, is don't accept what they are saying is true. Verify, get them. They have the burden of proof. So we're using basic principles of logic, even basic principles in the legal profession, in court procedure. The burden of proof is on the one who's making the argument. The one who's making the accusation, they bear the burden of proof. Hold them to it. The only new thing that I think I added to that was we're going to attack the foundation. They want to start this is step one. You can't challenge that, but step 2, 3, 4, and 5, have at it, tough guy. Do what you got to do, but you can attack that all day long. You can't attack that part. And I decided, no, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm gonna attack that. And so I was able to put examples in the book of people all over the U.S. that had put those basic principles together with the leading questions, and had great success, and were able to replicate that. So that was the basis of that. Don't take what they say is true, challenge it, and hold them to their burden of proof. Because when people did that, they were able to replicate the success that I had had.
And when you were doing the interview circuit for that book, that's when I found your material. And the Tao was saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, is very pertinent in my case in finding your work, because at the time I was dealing with a lot of traffic tickets. I lived in a city that many other people have this experience as well, where the police force were using traffic violations as a source of revenue generation. So after getting so many and simply taking them to these traffic law center type offices and watching lawyers essentially not even step into court, but just send a sheet of paper to the court and get it amended to a lesser charge or dismissed or whatever they did, really intrigued me. And I wondered what arguments they were using to achieve that result. And it was in that quest where I stumbled across your work. And out of all the things that I came across, yours really resonated with me because it stuck to an objective, empirical, factual basis. And it also used the court's rules against them. Like you mentioned, he who has the burden of proof, has the burden to prove. The one who asserts the claims has the burden to prove that true. And so when the prosecution makes all these claims and everything that comes inherent with them, it's their burden. So, and the court's obligations to provide a fair hearing and finding of facts. So within those parameters, you could really pick out many contradictions And at the end of the day, it really comes down to whether or not the judge that is hearing your case, how well they stick to their own principles, as opposed to just get another conviction, whether or not the line of questioning is actually effective in the damage control that you're seeking in court. So that was my experience onboarding with Adventures in Legalland. And I got to say, anyone who's read that book, I've met very few people that have just read it once. It's usually something that, not necessarily because it's complex or it's hard to get, but it jives against how we know or how we've been taught and conditioned to conduct ourselves in court. And it really provides a template for overcoming the intimidation tactics that the court imposes upon its victims, that being the defendants and these traffic violators. So that's Adventures in Legalland. If you can briefly describe the transition from your work from Adventures in Legalland to Government Indicted, what inspired you to write another book and go down the road now, which we know as Government Indicted?
Well, if you don't mind, you mentioned the interview circuit, so I can't do a retrospective without going down this short list. And
please take your time and elaborate.
In the video, I'll be able to do this because keep in mind, I released the book in 2003, and I won't use last names, but Dennis, I didn't even have the book printed. and Dennis gave me $25. I want that friggin' book. Dennis and John, good people. So I started doing the radio. I figured I got to promote this. Nobody knows who the hell I am. I didn't know what the hell I was doing as far as getting the book out there. So I started just trying to get myself booked on radio shows, which is not easy because these guys get, Ian could tell you how many pitches they get a day. And if you blow a pitch, you're done. You're done. So I got to give props here to the first few shows that I did. The very first show I did, I think she was a lawyer. It was called Crusade Radio with Linda Kennedy. And I did that on February 28, 2003. That was my very first radio show. I then, again, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of calls to get, and I'm still, working, helping people with court stuff. So it wasn't, so from February to April 2003, February 28th, it wasn't until April that I got and did Freedom Bound with Brent Johnson. And I think he still does a show. And then this changed things. My third show, I went from April, Calvin, to June. I didn't do a show. All I was doing was pitching. Nobody would put me on. How do you talk about that, hey, there's no evidence that that there's a state. There's no evidence anybody's a citizen. It's true, but it's not an easy sell. So then a friend of mine, she hooked me up with Ernest Hancock. So declare your independence. He was doing it at a small station, I think that physically was in Scottsdale. June 13, 2003. So big props to Ernest Hancock. That was actually the first terrestrial radio. I mean, the other two shows, I'm glad, but they were internet shows, which is fine. But Ernest was the first in-studio AM station. So big props there to Ernie for that. June 13, 2003. Then it wasn't another show until September. I did the Kitty K show in Salt Lake City. And then 2 days later, September 29th, Calvin, this did not work out too well for me. There was more pushback, and this guy just talked over me. It was the typical, didn't want to hear it, and ended the show early. Radio Ray, midday show, KGAL, Oregon. I don't even know if it's existing. I'll find out when I do the editing for this video. I did the Jeff Metcalf show in October. I did the Crusade Radio again with Suzanne LeBeau. And then I started doing a lot of shows with Pastor Massett on Higher Ground. I was on Truth Radio. And I had a really bad show because the producer, this is the thing, if the producer books you and doesn't really say much about what you're about to the host until the day of the show, it might not work out too well, especially when you're a no state guy. So Dave Schuyler Morning Show in Tucson, October 15, 2003, really bad, really bad. But Mitch Henk of 1310 WIBA in Madison, Wisconsin, ended the show early, saying I was giving him a headache.
Well, that happens. The day of, you just kind of get the rundown on what the guest is about, and wrapping your head around there is no state. It's hard for that to happen. I mean, the magic does happen every once in a while where it takes a minute or two to click, but for most people, it takes some time.
Yeah. And I have to mention at least two more. I'll be quick. Lee Roberts, KCSJ 590 in Pueblo, Colorado. I did that in December. He had a co-host that started saying, "What kind of a scumbag is this?" Okay. He basically calling me a scumbag because I was blaspheming the president. Remember, George Bush was the president at the time, so there was, but blaspheming the president. I was like, why are you using religious language? Even if I okay, but I had booked a show with Crane Durham, and I had actually spoken with him before, when I spoke to him, not as producer. I told him what I was about and what the material in the book was about. I told him. And we get on the show, and I could tell from here in the previous segment, my wife says, she comes in, "Marc, you can't do this show. You just got to bail. Just, you can't do the show. He's a Rush Limbaugh wannabe. It's going to be bad." And boy, Gina, she was right. Oh my gosh. I was trying to explain the basis, Calvin, what I do in the book about why I say there is no state, there is no government. So Crane Durham, that was on January 12th, 2004. It was my 43rd show, and he was the first one to actually, in anger, slam end it. So I was explaining that, the whole thing about a citizen is a member of the body politic owing a duty of allegiance or return for a duty of protection. And I was going through the 9/11 lawsuits and explaining, well, they're suing the airlines. Why aren't they suing the federal government for not protecting? And he started screaming about me saying that George Bush ordered 9/11. Like, no. I said, no, just let me finish. He said, no, you're not going to finish it. And he's screaming. And so I had to say that because it's something I want to include in the video.
Well, and that's too bad, too, because that principle, the admission from the government that the government has no duty to protect, is so powerful because, of course, as you've pointed out in your books and on many radio shows, without the reciprocal duty to be protected, there goes, they forfeit the obligation that defines that which is a citizen. And without citizens, how can you have a state? So it's very simple once you understand the factual nature of the definitions of the nomenclature that's being used and understand how, by their own admission, they're telling you that there is no obligation to protect. Therefore, it follows that there is no obligation to perform for performance of duty. So, and it was right about that time when you're doing the interview circuits and you went from RBN to, I think, WPTRN is where I found your stuff. And when I first found it, your archives were not well maintained at all, especially the early stuff. So I'm glad I got at it when I did, because I think a lot of the stuff that I ended up collecting was submitted by other people on the forums. And if it were attempted to be compiled today, I don't think there would be as complete of an archive as we've amassed, especially of the early material as we've amassed now. So, and we'll get back to the archive and what's happening with that a little later in this recording here. But the radio circuits is where I first really caught your material. And then, of course, tuning into the radio show, I was able to get a clearer understanding of where you were going with what you were saying. Lost in the which I appreciate the walk down memory lane with the radio circuit, but I want to pull back to government and we'll really move forward, I suppose, because this came much later. But what took you from Adventures in Legalland to getting around to writing Government Indicted?
Well, that grew out of the show. That, from doing the show and the show going the way it did, where it was more focused on court stuff, which is not what I intended necessarily to do. I wanted to discuss anarchy. I wanted to get to a voluntary society. I wanted the show to be activist minded, and a lot of the court stuff was, but that's just the way it went. And given that, and a number of people, I don't want to sound like. A lot of people did email and they call and they wanted me to do another book, and so I came up with, I figured, based on some suggestions, that I would do a more comprehensive one, a bit more of a background and have it more complete, so that somebody who learned those principles and knowing that this was material that from court, that people had actually replicated what they learned in Adventures, which was really, to me, a confirmation of the effectiveness and validity of the material, that people were taking the Adventures in Legalland, because it was sold all over, and thanks to Free Talk Live, I actually sold the first book in Sweden while I was on with Ian and Marc the first time. So big props to Marc and Ian for that.
Wow.
And so seeing that was a hell of a validation. So I wanted to continue. One of the reasons was to continue that, so that more people would be able to take these basic principles, and if they decided, not me, if they decided that this made sense and that they wanted to put it in action, that they could, and then they started replicating it also. You were actually, I remember we were at Libertopia. There's video of that when the first run of that, it was kind of a beta release. I know there were a lot of errors, but I think, people were happy to get that. So if actually anyone watching this has one of those original runs, definitely leave a comment.
Oh, well, I'm one of them. I still have one of your beta releases. And was that Libertopia or was that Ernie's Freedom Fest? I forget exactly where I got your beta copy, but yeah, it was definitely at one of the conferences you were attending, and I considered it a huge treat to be able to kind of get first eyes on that, and beautiful publication. And
it was definitely, we have video of it. So if you go to Mark Steve, if you go to my YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah, you were holding it up. That's right.
You're in that video with permission.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even without, there is no expectation of privacy once you're out and about, so forget about it,
Sky Conway, and of course,
Joyce Brandt.
Yes, Joyce Brandt. Appreciate all the, working with them. And I actually did work with Sky on a number of court cases, Sky being an attorney out of Connecticut. And I've mentioned that a lot on the show because of the underlying cases, some of that we worked on. But Government Indicted was, of course, it was a lot more comprehensive, took a lot more time. But I think the evidence speaks for itself. So when you see from the time that Government Indicted was released, I think in 2013, good gosh, that was 7.
Wow.
And when you go to markstevens.net or you see the videos on YouTube, when the success stories, so when you see all that success, like Helen in England is just one of them, Keith in Australia, you could see people taking basic principles and applying them and getting the same results. So that replication of the success was a validation, obviously, of the material. Of course, there's going to be people that got things thrown out that had nothing to do with their defense. Well, yeah, but that's not the ones I necessarily posted. Some, and I make it clear. If we don't think that the defense had anything to do with it, I say it. And so because the big thing too was, Calvin, was not just to get things tossed out. Oh, let's just get tricky. The objective, the big one, was to get people to see the truth, be able to spot bad arguments, and to be able to stand up for themselves. So that's, so I also post the train wrecks. It was to get people confident and give them the tools they needed to be able to confidently go in and defend themselves. And so whether they got a traffic ticket kicked out or not is not the big takeaway. It's that there were more people doing it themselves and not hiring lawyers or just paying it.
And I think both those books serve to empower people to be able to effectively do that. And not only are they able to exercise effective damage control, they are also able to strengthen their philosophical worldviews to better reflect the facts of reality. Like I said, I think there's so much money and so much resources that are derived out of nothing. It affords people a certain level of vanity to where they can believe whatever they want. But when you take this material to court and you see the beast for what it is, you really don't come back the same person, and you can't unsee what you've seen. So when you realize the state is essentially a psychological mechanism that people are conditioned to basically tolerate throughout their lives until they understand the evils and the the non-necessity of government, it kind of gives them a good foundation to move forward in not powering the government to further abuse them. So, both publications really serve to help people out in that way, where you don't get that from a lot of economic theory, at least not as powerful. When you see it firsthand and you hear the admissions coming from the highest priests, the judges, when they tell you they have no duty to protect, and it all kind of falls apart there, that's very powerful for the individual. So I highly recommend both books for anyone who is wanting to solidify their principles of the legitimacy of government, or much better said, the illegitimacy of government. So going back to some of the early stuff, Marc, I wanted to ask you, what articles and what, other than your books, what standout publications would you like to highlight over the years? I mean, some of your early stuff really resonated with me, especially the campaigns. In fact, I'll take a little credit where credit's due, is that I'll say, helping you administer your website, I categorized your varying campaigns over the years. So just to kind of jog your memory before you want to throw any one publication over another, some of your campaigns, the earliest ones were the Save a Bureaucrat Foundation.
Gosh, why mention that?
Why?
Because it was a total failure.
Well, maybe it didn't get legs, but I think it was a worthwhile endeavor. And I think what was behind it was very important. But you also have your Adventures in Legalland World Tour, where you were forwarding your book around from person to person. I'm interested to see how far that went. You have your Affidavit of Fear, your Civil Disobedience Weekly Spotlight, which I think you were probably the most active participant in that campaign, but we'll come back to that. You have the Same Old Lie World Tour, highlighting people's cases of effective damage control. Of course, the classics, Calls a Shame, the No State Project Traffic Study, and the complaints from lawyers. So kind of brushing over all those subjects, what publications or what campaigns really stand out for you, and which ones would you consider your best successes, and which ones would you consider your least successful?
Well, the least successful, obviously, was the Save a Bureaucrat Foundation. That went absolutely nowhere. There was some actual bureaucrats that were interested, but there was no actual, nobody cared enough to help provide any funds to re-educate. It was a complete.
It's quite ironic that the state, who has this whole scheme to re-educate people to to better acclimate themselves to them, are so opposed to re-education themselves.
Yeah, the book tour, I never heard back from anybody. It didn't happen. It was a complete flop. I thought it was an interesting and fun thing. I wasn't thinking any world changing things, life change. It was just a fun idea. The Affidavit of Fear, I can't say any, people did it. I don't know if it helped So the civil disobedience weekly spotlight, yeah, there was some people that engaged in that, and we have some video. Some of the videos may have been taken down from my original YouTube channel. The Agora Hour didn't go anywhere. I thought it was a decent idea, but that didn't go anywhere. The Same Old Lie World Tour, I'm going to put that in with the Calls of Shame, and I think these were I think we can all agree that the Call of Shames were some of the best. I even get over listening to my own voice because I can't. Yeah, none of us like that.
It's worth it for those pregnant pauses.
Yeah, there's some pretty good ones. You did an edit during a live broadcast that I played during a live broadcast, and it was with a bureaucrat. It was a husband and wife team.
Was it the dream sequence where I added in the chimes? A lot of people like that.
No.
Oh, okay.
Because what you did was you cut the sequence, the time, and so she had said one thing and then she denied saying it, and so you did the record scratch and you so you could hear her saying exactly what she just said she didn't say.
I had a lot of fun having the privilege to be able to edit those calls and post them. I gotta say, I have to put that on the record. Those were fun and really helped me learn how to better conduct myself. The questions never changed, but how you deploy them, the delivery, those were what the Calls of Shame were really helpful for, is how to really deliver those questions effectively. Because like you've pointed out on your show several times, most times you have a very limited window to get a certain number of questions in before they essentially shut you down. And as JT often would say, next. Because that was his experience with a lot of judges. Next question, next. We already settled that issue. So that happens a lot. And those Calls of Shame really are instructive in showing people how they could rebound or how they could get back on track to their questions, and at least highlight that they don't have the answers that they are required to have to bring a case before the court. So yeah, those Calls of Shame were awesome.
Thanks. And what I was able to do, like with the interview with John Buttrick, who's a federal magistrate here in Phoenix, and the law professor in Canada, the difference in how you discuss things when you've got somebody who is a professional and is an adult, like the judge Buttrick, and as opposed to 90% or 95% of the time, they're not very good. But one of the benefits of what I thought was so great from the Call of Shame was when I got from somebody that I've worked with for a long time an internal document, because I guess he had done some requests for this unbeknownst to me, and it was Gary Murphy. It was worth it if that clipped. Gary Murphy, the IRS agent, and I have the actual document from Gary Murphy on the website, and it's preserved in video. And he had said that he put that out to the Wyoming office of the IRS. I think it was I can't remember the exact. Anyway, it's Wyoming, and he said that he was instructing them at that agency not to take any calls from Marc Stevens and not to answer any of my questions because I have over 24 calls posted on my website that are not. They do not put the agency in a good light. He said they were very embarrassing to the agency. So I have to say, personally, that's one of my highlights, that I got an IRS agent, Gary Murphy, to admit that these calls with me were embarrassing to the agency.
Yeah, and there are several other good ones in there. Really, aren't they all embarrassing to the agency?
I have so many where I think some of the better ones are the ones when they don't hang up. It's when they just can't answer, and they're and it's some of the, you think it was just because there's one in particular for someone from New Hampshire. There's a few, and I think they're really instructive to people, because if you doubt my material and how effective you could be in court by just asking these questions, And you hear these professionals, someone from the Secretary of State's office, there's someone from the Attorney General's office, and they cannot answer the question that a skeptic or a believer is going into the call thinking of course you can prove the government exists. Of course you can prove that there are citizens. And then they hear someone from the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, and he can't answer the question. So the least you can take away from that is, holy crap, if someone who is a deputy attorney general cannot prove his claim that the laws apply or that they're citizens, if they can't, I don't have anything to worry about by putting a cop on the stand in a traffic case and asking him the same question, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all fair game.
Yeah, and I've argued for the longest time, and I think the logic is sound. If it's right according to their own rules and their own rules and laws, the one who makes the argument bears the burden of proving it's true. It's pretty standard. Put them on if they can't answer it off. If they can't answer in court, if they're making the claim, I don't care what the claim is. I don't care. Doesn't matter. If they're making a claim, they're using it against me. The laws say they have the burden of proving it's true. So I put them on the stand, and they can't do that. So the call of shames is, that's a big standout. Of course, the one that I was referencing before with the husband and wife team, where I filed a complaint with the bar against them for lying, and I had it on audio. I had audio of them lying. She was the one that was so great that I boxed her into a corner with her own words, using her own claims, her own argument. Tell me exactly factually why the laws apply just because he's physically in Oregon. They just do. That's one of the highlights. I go back and that's so. If those watching this and listening to this, definitely go to my website or while it's still up, or to my YouTube channel and go through the call to shame. They won't disappoint you, and especially if you're a skeptic. Listen to these people and try to come up with an argument why they can't answer the question or why they shouldn't have to.
Right. I also want to add that there will be a torrent file that I will post somewhere. So if anything, you could look at my Twitter account. I can't get into my Google account to access YouTube at the moment, and for a while now. But I still have access to my Calvin Twitter account, and that is Twitter/Calv. I think it's just Calvin DeWitt. I think my YouTube was Calv DeWitt because Calvin DeWitt was taken. But anyhow, people could look on the Twitter feed, and I'll share it with you too, so you could tweet the link to the torrent that we'll have, the calls of shame, the radio archive, so people who find this material later could share it with other people, learn from it, and start challenging their own complaints, baseless claims, empty assertions from these prosecutors when they want to victimize you and make a revenue stream out of your misery. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, we've covered a lot of your publications and a lot of your work. Do you have anything that sticks out in your mind as far as responses to your publications or the calls of shame from either listeners or even the people, the subject, of the calls of shame, for example, themselves? Are there any standout criticisms or responses to your articles, radio shows, calls of shame, anything of the like that are worth noting or talking about?
Well, the two big ones as far as positive is, and I mentioned Ernest Ernie show doing that the first time. There were two people that heard those shows, and I know them to this day. And that was back in 2003. JT is how I met JT, and Nonentity. And what they had done was they had written up about on, it's 2003, so there's some kind of message board or some website, and they had posted about the same day. Again, this is early 2003. I've done only a handful of radio shows. Nobody knows who the hell I am. They don't know now, but about a few more know now. I just started getting responses, people, wanting to order the book. Not a lot, there's never been a lot, but and I reached out to both of them. And I had reached out to JT and I called him that day. I said, dude, I got to thank you. I said, I can't, I've done all these, I've done like 5, 8 radio shows. And I'm getting more response to my work from your article, you know? So and that's where that went. I would say as far as the low point has to be when this lawyer from Kansas filed a complaint and he wrote about me online. And I'm not going to give the details out because I don't want anyone looking this person up. So anything ever happens to this guy, there's nothing that I've done. I've not promoted. I've not mentioned his name, and I've said I don't want anyone looking up because I did say he was a lawyer in Kansas, and he that was to have somebody. I've been accused of a lot of things, but what really got it was how he falsely accused me of aggressively marketing to vulnerable people and stealing and destroying from them and destroying their lives. That I have destroyed countless thousands of people's lives. That was the worst criticism that I can remember, and it's not just because it happened, just in February. That was pretty bad. To lump me in then as a sovereign citizen, knowing that I'm an anarchist, and I give the reasons why I'm an anarchist. So that was the low point, yeah. And what sucks is you got to walk away from it. There's nothing you can do because the Arizona Bar Association made very, very clear they were not going to do anything. And even when I was able to show that he lied through his teeth, they just brushed it off as, well, it's an opinion. Where did he get the facts wrong? I didn't aggressively market. It was not his opinion that I aggressively market. That way he was stating that as a fact. The other lawyers who attacked me did not reach the depths of depravity that this. Well, there was the one who actually tried to link me with the murder suicide racist scumbag who used to call the show, tried to draw a connection between my work and what he did. That was pretty low too.
Well, bad apples don't just exist on aged trees or in the police department. They're also bad apples that, will criticize you and do it any way they can. And the whole assertion that being lobbed in with the sovereign citizen types, and that's the philosophy that we're pursuing here, is, well, I mean, as you pointed out several times on your show before, it's a straw man argument that sidesteps the true principles and the questions that we use to get at the truth. So that's kind of an easy one to overcome. On the topic of criticisms, are there any examples of criticisms that have changed your mind or help reform or progress your thought or change your approach on how you do your work in court? Anything like along those lines?
Wow. I got a lot of feedback from people over the years, and I think what the big standout and the big difference was that knowing that most of the time we only had a few minutes, that you had to make that count. And so that's why I would say on the show, you got to go for the throat. And so when I do the role playing on the show, when I would always do it, at least initially, where I have a 2-minute window. And that's why I would discuss, going directly at their argument that the laws apply because I physically, attacking, collaterally attacking or challenging, that'll be taken out of context too. He's advocating attacking the judge. You're challenging their base assertion of subject matter and personal and territorial jurisdiction, which is all founded on the same argument or claim that if I'm physically in Arizona, the laws apply. And that was because so many people said, Mark, I get to ask 2 questions and he shut me down. Okay, we got to make it count. And thank goodness too, because it did help. So people were having better results by doing that. So that's the big one. Go for the throat. Don't ask these questions. Well, am I entitled to a fair trial? It's a good question, but we generally don't have the time to get into that.
Okay, and just for clarification, I know this might be a little deep into the podcast to bring this about, but I think it's important to clarify is a term that you've used a lot is effective damage control. And that's essentially what you're doing when you go in and you challenge the prosecutor's assertions associated with the complaint they lodge against you. And would you mind explaining in its most basic construct what effective damage control is and what it means, and how that is applied in court? And just because you don't get the outcome that you're hoping for, whether or not that is a validation or invalidation of the defense strategy of what we term effective damage control. So if you don't mind diving into that just a bit and clarifying that to the listener so that they are on the same page as far as what it is we actually expect of these outcomes when we challenge the state's legal attacks.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has been misunderstood or ignored or mischaracterized. He says damage control, but he never says what it is. I did an entire video that I dedicated just to that, and it's on the web. It's sticky in the forum, just because so I could just go back to that. Not but damage control is look. They're looking to damage you. They're trying to get as much as they can under their system. And they get around things. So let's say the maximum fine is $200, and they'll lump on $400 worth of court fees to get around that. So they're looking to damage you, and it's going to be either your time and your prep, or it's going to be money, or it's going to be putting you in jail. So I talk about getting leverage, because if we can, right now, as soon as the moment I'm charged, all the leverage is against me. I have nothing on them yet. But if I can go in and I can challenge the assertions being used against me, if I can get some leverage that I can impress on the prosecutor that, look, you can't prove your claim. You don't have a competent witness to do that by your own admission. If you put the cop on, so I try to build some kind of leverage that to get a deal. So because look, I know if I go to trial, there's a good chance I'm going to get run over, and they're going to say, found cool, just appeal it. That's, So it's happened a lot of times, and we post these. People will, file a motion to dismiss and get asked for discovery. They'll initially speak with the prosecutor. I always wanted to speak with the prosecutor. I know that's not always I wanted to in order to get it resolved. That, I'd rather not speak to a lawyer. Anyway, but you do what you got to do. And so if I can impress on them that, by questioning them like I would in court, or if they were the witness on cross-examination, that they can't make their case, they're more and they don't want to go to trial anyway, so they'd be more likely to get me a deal. So where they may have been looking for $500, we can walk away for $75. So that is limiting the damage that they want to do to us. Or, so that's what I mean by that. And you are a really good example of damage control. I don't know if you want to share that.
I have no problem at all. I mean, I've been to court more times than I'd like to admit, somewhere between a dozen and 24 times, probably closer to 24. And not every time did I get the outcome that I was hoping for. Every time I was able to get predictable results as far as their responses to the questions of whether or not those facts exist. And most times I was able to take that leverage I had to work some sort of damage control that was lesser than what they were threatening me with. And I would say I have about, and this is a rough estimate, it could be 60-40, it could be 50-50, but I want to say about half the time it did result in dismissals of the complaints. And I'm not just talking about parking tickets. I've had speeding tickets. I've had possession charges. And especially when it comes to the drug war, possession charges and, having that dismissed out of court by simply asking the prosecutor to prove their argument in all elements of the argument, not necessarily just that you were in possession of, but that there was actually a loss, injury, or harm, or a claim that restitution could provide relief for, and that I'm getting a fair and impartial hearing. All those are a part of a case that are not necessarily associated with the actual act of the charge itself. So learning how to focus in on those and expose that the prosecution does not have a complete case as they should before even bringing it before the court really helped me to get those results. And like I said, a 50% success rate for someone who has spent 0 hours in law school, that says something. Okay. And it'd be one thing if it was just you and I, and this is something I want to, well, you know what? I'll bring it up now. The No State Project traffic study, highlights many examples of other people taking the same lines of questioning relating to whether or not the prosecution could prove their assertions with facts and getting favorable results, or as we just discussed, exercising effective damage control. Again, not all the time is it necessarily getting something completely dismissed from court. It could look like just like what you have when you bring a complaint to a traffic lawyer. Sometimes it's an amended charge, and given the aggression and unlimited resources of the state, sometimes that's the best outcome you could swing in a particular courtroom or jurisdiction. So it's all relative, but the one constant is they cannot completely answer the questions of facts, whether or not what they're asserting actually exists in reality. They'll always straw man or find a logical fallacy, desperately grab onto these logical fallacies, hoping to dupe everyone else in the courtroom or perhaps even a jury into falling back into lockstep with the aggression and assertiveness of the state. So it's not just you and I or even simply the people in this show, but that leads me to another question. Is the No State Project traffic study, is there anything you would like to elaborate as far as the results, and to what degree of success would you say that study was? And about, I'm sure it's hard to tabulate exactly the number of participants, but, kind of walk us through that study. What was the nature of it, and how many participants, and how successful would you consider that study?
I thought it was very successful. I don't know exactly the number of people. I'd have to go back, and it's not something, we talked about on the show, and it's just something that I did, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. One of the takeaways is that one, we got more people to challenge who otherwise wouldn't have, because there was support, through the show and with the Skype chat. So there was support. So people who wouldn't otherwise defend themselves did. And again, that to me is a big takeaway. Okay, having people defend themselves in a low risk situation. We're able to demonstrate, and this because there's an article, at least one article on this, and a number of videos, that we had people in the United States prevail. We had people in Canada prevail. We had people in England prevail.
That was definitely one of my favorite parts of the show, is getting those calls of people, even if they were failures, going into court and sharing their stories of their experiences in the courtroom, defending themselves and getting the same predictable results we talk about on the show. But that was definitely my favorite, is hearing from all the people, not necessarily just participants in the No State Traffic Study, but just everyone who's gone in and as an activist and held the prosecution's feet to the fire. Those stories that are on the show are just priceless and well worth a re-listen, especially for anyone who hasn't listened to the show. That's, I believe, the biggest treat within those audio archives.
Yeah, to be able to have, I remember one guy in particular, because I did the show in California. It was a Saturday show, and it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I'd done it in California. And he was saying that even though he lost ultimately, and he didn't lose a lot, there was no jail, it wasn't hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he was doing it on principle. And, it was like $100, so it's a lot of money to me, but especially now, but it wasn't a huge loss. And he said that even though he lost, he valued the experience and what he learned, so that if it does ever happen again, he has the tools and the experience to go in and defend themselves. And going in knowing, anytime anybody goes into court, whether you're a prosecutor or a defense, it's always a crapshoot. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. Obviously, it's a little bit more in your favor if it's an IRS case. Yeah, you're going to win. But I'm not talking about that. Yeah, but just court in general. So so I didn't get anybody, and only 3 or 4 people to go to city council meetings and challenge them that way. But a lot of people were empowered to go into court and defend themselves where they otherwise wouldn't. And it shows another takeaway, Calvin, like with you, it shows you can do it and you can get at least as good a result as if you mortgaged your house and got an attorney, right?
That's right. Absolutely. And it's surprising how many judges will actually respect you coming in and asking meaningful questions that challenge the prosecutor's case. Many times I got compliments from the judge for the line of questioning I was pursuing. I didn't always get the favorable result, because you got to imagine how many times have they set precedent for putting people behind bars or extracting money for this charge before you walked in the door, regardless whether or not the prosecution can answer those questions or not. And so you really shake their reality by bringing these questions out. And sometimes, not all the time, you actually do get a favorable result. So and you've pointed this out on your show many times too, it's really important to gain neutral rapport with the judge, or positive rapport if you can, but most judges tend to at least act impartial. So if you can at least get them to agree to certain established rules of what the prosecution needs to continue forward with their case, then it's just a matter of asking the questions of prosecution and giving them the rope to hang themselves. And oftentimes that's what happens. So I highly encourage anyone with a minor offense that even, with the maximum charge thrown at them, if they're willing to go in there and challenge it, you will walk out of the courtroom with a hardened perspective on what the role of government is in your life and how you should respond accordingly to their threats and to their offers. A lot of times government offers himself out as a helping hand, but with that comes certain risks down the road, and such as a welfare state. I mean, they might help you out with welfare, and it might be helpful in the moment, but with the strings attached to that, may not be something you principally agree with.
Yeah, I encourage. Yeah, if you guys, the Call to Shames, and the shows where people called it never show, but when we did the shows, when we did the postmortem, and we talked about what happened in court, those were highly, I thought, and I think the resulting shows, the shows that came after, showed that, improved that they were highly motivating and encouraging and educational, because more people would do that. And they say, hey, look, I heard so and so and what he did. That traffic study. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it wasn't something we talked about in a while, and because it brought back what happened with Government Indicted, where with the similar thing that was said in Adventures, because I remember people saying to me, people I was working with directly, 20 years ago, and how the hell did you predict almost word for word what the judge, the prosecutor, and the cop would say? How the hell did you do that? It's all the same thing, because my point in saying that was because the people in Australia, it's like, the same stupid thing that I heard them, heard you say that they said on your show. They said that they did the same thing, because they're all trying to protect, and it's the same program. They're trying. It's like I said earlier, Calvin. They want you to not look behind that curtain. They want you to, they said that you've got to accept that our argument, it's all it is our claim that the laws apply because you're physically in Australia, you cannot challenge that. And they never say in court, I know what the argument is. I know they because they don't want to embarrass the idiots like me. They don't want to embarrass, they never say in court, that's a political question, you can't challenge it. They never say that.
I want to point out, too, the ability to replicate these results in many different jurisdictions and continents. Of course, the success stories are intercontinental successes, right, is known as the scientific method. And in a reality where we value testing hypotheses, using the scientific method to be able to predict and replicate results is very powerful in validating a particular theory. So unlike the sovereign citizen claim, where it's very interpretive and it's not based in facts, here, right, by taking in a defensive strategy that is based on facts and evidence or the lack thereof, you're able to get very predictable and replicable responses. And I think that is very powerful for substantiating the case that, well, there is no state.
Right. Well, a very instructive video on that is the Colby Granville statement that he made in the Tempe City Council meeting. And he doubled and tripled down on the show. And it's not an aberration. He wasn't saying something that is not universally held by people called government. When I asked for evidence to support their claim that the laws apply against us physically in Arizona, he said, look, we have jurisdiction because we said so, and then it's up to you to prove otherwise. We have jurisdiction because we said so. And that they want to characterize, I'm talking about the critics, not the people actually in court. They want to characterize that statement, we have jurisdiction because we said so, as a political question or issue, not subject to challenge. My position has been a fangul. If you raise it against me in court, you have a burden to prove it's true. Now, does every judge agree with that? No. What issue do all judges agree to anyway, right?
Yeah, geez.
I mean, come on. But that's my position.
Well, that's the interpretive nature of law, too, is they want to take issues of fact and pretend that they're issues of law and that they could, just give you whatever response they want. They could selectively, just whatever fits their interests, they could respond with instead of actually responding to the question of fact.
Yeah, and so that's why my position being that the system, the process is fundamentally unfair and violates their own rules for due process because it's fundamentally unfair. Well,
I would say the process is engineered to be fair. It's just the way that they implement the process is unfair. So if they followed their own rules, it could be fair, hypothetically, but because of the nature of the monopoly of force that they have, there are no consequences for them reimagining or reinterpreting hard black and white laws or rules that they set forth themselves, not us, and sidestepping those in the interest of perpetuating their own existence.
Yeah. It's again, if someone is making a claim against me, the burden is on them to prove it. To turn around and say that they can make a claim, and then when it's challenged, that it's off limits. No, if I can't challenge it, that's not fair.
And keep in mind, you and I can't do that. If we go out and we make a claim and someone asks us to prove it, we can't simply just draw straw man arguments or reach for logical fallacies and expect that to be accepted by the person bringing the critique. So it's something that you and I, or we wouldn't tolerate from someone else to substantiate their own arguments. So why should we do it with people with monopolies on force, other than the fact that they're willing to physically or mentally or economically or psychologically destroy your life? But to the extent that you can, you should resist, you should question them, and you should give other people, through your own example, a template to where it empowers them to ask these same questions, because I think they get to the core of the nature of government. And I'm not fully settled on whether or not government is legitimate or not as far as some form of implementation, but I think we're all in agreement from libertarians on down to anarchists and beyond that the role of government needs to be lessened to a great extent, because it's encroached upon our lives and become more of a parasite than it has at what its original intention was to be a helping hand for people to socially experience some form of tranquility. I think that word has been used in the founding documents and in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, is to maintain tranquility and pursuit of happiness. We've come a long way from that, but that's because we've allowed these statists and bureaucrats to take over and feed us logical fallacies as legitimate responses to questions of fact. So kudos to you for really developing that template for myself and others to follow in your footsteps.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks. And I just to address this last point, this point one last time, hopefully I'll keep to my word. Even if we accept that it is a political question, whether when the politicians and the bureaucrats claim that the laws apply, the Constitution applies because I'm physically in Arizona, the fact the fact still remains, and I've had critics on the show like Colby Granville. I wouldn't say he was necessarily a critic in that sense, but when asked the question outside of court, where it doesn't matter whether you frame it as a political question and however you paint it. When you ask those questions out of court to people who believe that it is true, not a single one of them in all these years has ever been able to produce evidence and prove that the claim is true. Not a single one. So it stands to reason that of course they're not going to want you to challenge that in court because they know you can't prove it. And so you get these spin doctors. You get the lawyers who have to say, well, that's a political question. You can't. You can't. You have to accept it, and you can't challenge it. No. If there's a takeaway too from this wrap, we
call it a retrospective wrap up.
Yeah, this retrospective wrap up is anytime somebody makes a claim, they've had the burden of proof. And if they said they don't have to prove it, then you could just, you could just, discount whatever they say, because Hitchens razor, which I'm glad this came up so I can remember.
Hitchens or Occam's?
No, Hitchens razor.
Oh, okay. Lay it on me.
You know what I'm going to say. That which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Yep. Oh, man, it's been a while since I've heard that, but yeah, it rings true.
And so that's a so I can use that graphic again for this wrap up. So keep that in mind.
Very
Anybody
fitting.
says I don't have to prove my claim is not really a credible source there, a credible person there.
Well, that's a very thorough rundown of a lot of the activity that the No State Project has been engaged in, and many of the campaign successes, critiques, and perceived failures. One of the things I want to get into before we move entirely away from the fruits of your labors, Marc, is one of my favorite parts of the No State Project is when you had the opportunity to present at conferences. And are there any highlights you'd like to share or experiences from any of the conferences? I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen your speeches at Libertopia or Jackalope or out here in PorkFest back in 2010, that you'll get a lot of great information from those video recordings. But is there anything to be said for the speeches and the presentations, especially to include the workshops? The workshops are very constructive in helping people fortify their understanding of the line of questioning to take to court. But are there any commentaries you would have on your public engagements and workshops?
The PorkFest, because that's where I met you. I mean, I knew you on the phone, but that's where I actually met you in person. Because
for the first time.
10 years ago. It was PorkFest 2010.
Jeez.
Wow. It was great.
I will say the PorkFest 2010 was very memorable in that you and I both had the opportunity to sign the Shire Society Declaration, which is often featured on the Free Keen video upload. So people could still see that and find our names on there. So it's I'm very proud to have met you there and have been there for the initiation and the genesis of the Shire Society.
It's funny you mention that. And for those who are familiar with that, yes, I am the jackass who ripped it.
It was you.
That was me. A pen similar to what I'm holding over here. You can't see it, but it's real. Yeah. Sorry about that, Ian and everybody. That was me. It was also.
I wonder if you come from the lineage of John Hancock.
I wasn't trying to do that.
Well,
I'm
sure John wasn't either.
Now, the only prominent Northeast lineage that I'm a Mayflower descending through my line in Thomaston, Maine, but not any not any founders. But I appreciated the opportunity to speak at Libertopia. I thought Joyce and Sky did a great job. I wish that I could have gone the last few times, but I just have not had the means to do that. Ernie gave me the shot at Freedom Summit. That was a lot of fun. And Jackalope, I actually like Jackalope a lot because I don't have to put a shirt on, a collared shirt. And I thought that Alma did a great job with that. I enjoyed that. It's usually 115 degrees here in Mesa, and going up to Jackalope. I went with you. I think it was 2015 or 16, and we had a good time at that.
Oh yeah, I mean, anytime you get out camping and out in the wildlife, it was great. Beautiful area where they have that. And I got to ask, are they still running Jackalope annually to this day?
I know they did it. I'm pretty certain they did it last year. I don't know about this year. This is just and last year, I couldn't have done it. I was one of the worst years of my life, and then I entered 2020. So I've had so much going on. I don't know. It's not something, I haven't even logged onto my Marc Stevens No Stay Project web Facebook page. That's where I would have seen notifications. I haven't done that probably since February. So I don't know. I hope they are, because hopefully things are back to the way, somewhat normal, and I can go back there next year.
Oh yeah, I mean, anyone who gets the opportunity to go out to Jackalope, take it, because it's beautiful, and it's a great way to engage with other libertarians, other anarchists, in a very informal and comfortable setting. So I remember when we were out there, we had a chance to have a very candid conversation with Adam Kokesh. That was just awesome. Just to not to have the pressure of just being on television or on the radio, but just to kind of sit down and just kind of roll through the topics very casually. And so I very much appreciated the times I was able to make it out to Porkfest, to Libertopia, to the Freedom Summit, to Jackalope. Those events, just priceless. And I mean, the events were great in and of themselves, but the other half of what made them so great was connecting with all the different people, the like minds, because in regular communities, it's not, you can't walk in every door or walk around public and find other anarchists. Now, up here in New Hampshire, it might be a little different, but even then, it's still pretty rare. Your chances are just a little better than non-existent elsewhere. So it's always nice to make it out to those venues, and I really always appreciated your speeches, because it was nice to be able to see you connect in live with some people that are unfamiliar with your material, and having the Q&A sessions that would break out after the speeches, and having some people just simply put questions to you and get very direct and simple answers, unlike what you would get in court, of course, and kind of watch their evolution of thought solidify or either evolve or change or what have you. That was a very beautiful thing to witness out at those events. So I have very fond memories. In fact, I'm wearing one of the t-shirts that I think you gave to me. I'm not, it's the A3 white markstevens.net t-shirt. So I was wearing that just in case I was going to be filming myself today. I wanted to, support the team, but definitely fond memories with the shirt too. So are there any other comments or any other takeaways from the public engagements or workshops even that are worth noting or having anyone know about, on this retrospective wrap up here?
I really enjoyed getting and working with people in person. I'm going to be a little biased here. So one of the best workshops was, we did it. I'm drawing blanks on the owners' names, but it was in San Diego. And not only did we have a really cool jam, Spencer was down for that. I can't remember the other musicians' names. I really apologize for that. Sam from New Zealand was there. And, so anyone who was there would remember Sam was the 6'9". He's such a good guy. Yeah, it was great to be able to meet them, and we had a really cool blues jam, which was great. And I've tried to set those up, but that hasn't worked out so much. But that was a lot of fun. So that's that getting to meet with people and such informal circuit was a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to get to Jackalope next year if they're still doing it.
I really miss meeting the people in the community at these conferences, which brings us to our next topic here. And I want you to do some good reflection here, because as far as a community that has been built around the No State Project and effective damage control, there's been very many moments in the forum and where people who listen to the material collaborate and share their thoughts. So I want to give a proper memorialization to notable forum members, Skype members, or comment followers on the social media that have really stood out to you and have really helped grow the flow of thought that has become your show over the years.
It's hard to remember the usernames, but I know on Skype, we've got, I think it's Phil. I don't want to use his, rather than use his username. Stahl, even though as of late, but he's always been a big supporter of the show. As far as forum members, Free Range Canuck, and I can't remember all it's more difficult to remember, but I appreciate it,
well, I mean, of course we have Non and we have I2.
Yeah. And I2.
Oh yeah. I mean, huge. I mean, Non, I gotta say, Non-Entity, his full handle, has been very helpful over the years as far as helping me inject a little bit of humor into such a very serious subject matter, because if you can't find some humor in what you're doing, it's very there's a lot of despair that tends to creep in, and that can be demotivating. But nonsense of humor has really kind of helped me through a lot of the hard parts of grappling with the aggression of the state over the years. So I want to give him a really good hat tip as far as that goes. I really appreciate interacting with him over the years. The same could be said for I2. And of course we got Keith, both Keiths in Canada and in Australia. EL comes to mind as well.
The only email address I had for the Crappolator, I contacted Keith, and I didn't hear back, unfortunately. So maybe he catches this and he can contact me with the new email address. He actually, speaking of the workshops, I did one in Cheektowaga, and I was actually born in Cheektowaga and met some really good people there. In fact, one that was born in James was born in the same hospital as me, just a few days after. And the Crappolator, he got me good. And I wish I had the video to this, but the hard drive crashed and I didn't have it backed up. But Keith was in Canada, and he had told me he couldn't go. Of course, he was pranking me, and so I actually got to meet Keith for that weekend, which was really cool. So that was another. Yeah, that. Keith is a good guy. He's had some good success there, and of course, not everything has worked out, but hopefully we get to hear from him soon, and he's doing better.
And of course, there was Al and Mike, who were part of Freeman Radio that we've had on the show more than a number of times. And of course, that's a late Al, I would like to say, but also Mike, what? Too. Al?
Al from California?
He was a host of Freeman Radio. He passed away.
Different Al, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, Mark, we paid our respects on the show. But anyhow,
yeah.
Al and Mike, they did Freeman Radio, which later became Vollencast for a very short while. I broadcast with them a few times, and it always fun. Talking about the principles of voluntarism. So, they were big supporters of the show, and they did what they could to help spread the word themselves. And I'm trying to think of. I'm sorry, Vin James and James. Yes, No State Project UK was awesome. We even have a few friends from Ireland, and I'm not sure
Yeah.
if.
Well, there was Alex Knight, the third.
Oh yeah, can't forget about Alex Knight, a
Jim
regular guest on
Davies.
the show. Of
Jim
course,
Davies.
Jim Davies, of course. And I can't say
Kurt.
enough about JT coming on the show and sharing
Right.
his perspective too. Can't forget about good old JT.
Yeah.
And
And Kurt Tischer.
absolutely, yeah. Kurt, when I found you, he was helping you out with the website and doing some of the stuff in the background, and it was good to have.
Yeah.
We've had him on the show a few times. Another fellow anarchist, voluntarist, and musician. Can't get enough of those.
Oh yeah, great music. Yeah, very Temple 8.
Yep, 30-year productions. There have been a lot of people that have come through, and this is no way comprehensive of everybody that has been on the show. So I want to give a personal expression of gratitude to everybody who has interacted the show, no matter how small, and really questioned the role of the state in their lives, and the illegitimate authority that they dispense upon us involuntarily. All those people that I've had the opportunity to share philosophy and strategy of effective damage control with, I still carry around with me to this day when I share such strategy with other people. I take the things that I've learned from you, of course, primarily, but also refined by critics and the proof of concept through the court system that they've only served to prove the questions even more valid time and time again. So to all of my to the friendlies and adversaries out there, extreme expression of gratitude for all the experiences of over the years, because I think I've been myself, yourself, and other people have been able to walk away with a much clearer understanding of the territory compared to the map that we have. We could basically redraw our maps to better reflect a territory of reality. So a big thanks to anybody who has contributed, interacted, or become involved with the No State Project, the traffic study, the books, or have come to the conferences in any way, shape, or form. Huge. And of course, all the network operators from John Stant Miller all the way up to Ian Freeman and everyone in between that have hosted your program. It's a big hat tip to them as well for, going out on a limb, because, more than anyone, Mark, is that your material isn't popular for a lot of network operators. So the fact that you've had, these people in your life that have been able to take you on board and give you a platform to share your information, a big thank you to everyone who has been involved with that objective over the years. So.
Yeah, I have a few other. Eyal. I don't know. Did you mention Eyal?
I haven't, but Eyal is another big player out in Israel.
Yeah, he was. He a week after I did the show with Bill about. I can't remember. I'm sorry. He does a podcast and he runs an animal sanctuary up in Washington, and we just started talking. We had nothing prepared. I almost never prepared stuff for the show. I like doing things off the cuff. And we just started talking.
Well, that's where the artistry shines. I'm sorry to interject, but that's one of the things I like about your show the most is that, it's not a prepared statement. It's not a narrative that you're driving. I mean, I guess it is, but it's one that's right off the top of the head. It's not anything that you're taking from someone else and constructing and putting out there in any fashion. It's just, it is what it is on its face. So I'm sorry. Yeah, you were talking about this participant in Washington State and Eyal?
Yeah, so we were doing a show on a Saturday. I think I was just doing the show on Saturday. Yeah, it was 2015, so I was only doing the show on Saturday still. And we're talking about inconsistent thoughts in our head, and activity and behavior. And it led to my becoming, realizing that I wasn't consistent with my principles, and by eating animals. And I went vegetarian. So from that Saturday to the next Saturday when I did the show, I did not eat any meat. It was a vegetarian. Well, Eyal, the very next week, set me straight and showed that I'm not consistent. It's a good start, but he set me straight. And I thank him for that. And I know non-entity, I know you try, I know. I should have listened. But Eyal, he set me straight. So always supported the show. I always appreciated his calls and the discussion. And obviously, Bill in New Hampshire,
Oh my
the
gosh.
Twin Mountain Country Store, and of course Dan. Bill can't say enough good things. He went through and did, after all the things that happened, and he put up with, my gosh, what they did to this guy. Still came on and did a broadcast with me where we broke it all down, and then I did the video to that where I have pictures of the actors involved, the people that actually did this to him. But can't thank him enough. Mike, who always called in Northern California, Chris in California. Holy crap, my friend! I really appreciate the support, and I'm not going to give. Of course, I'm not giving last names, but I do have to say to Don and his family. Well, to Don's family, I've always appreciated the time I got to spend on the phone with him and helping him out. And I wish his family the best at this time. Sorry, but that's all I'm going to say about that. But I always appreciated Don's continued support of the show. And Don is actually in the book. He's one of those people that are in government indicted, and not necessarily by name. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's support of the show. And now I know, to wrap this up, I'm still here. I'm just not doing the show anymore. We still have the Skype chat, right? So, and I still have my email. I welcome, where if I can't help record anymore, but I do welcome news, and I can give support as far, point you in the right direction. And if Calvin, somebody had a felony charge thrown out, but when I found out the underlying facts, it wasn't something I wanted to promote on the show.
Oh, well.
It wasn't sexual.
Right. Well,
there was violence, so I didn't want to post it. I was going to do a separate success story, and even though he stood up for himself, I don't like the underlying facts. So.
And that may be the case, but at the end of the day, what it goes to prove is that the state doesn't have the facts to back up their assertion. So, unfortunately, it could be used, in cases where there may be, a serious violation. However, it doesn't make the state any more legitimate. It just, if anything, it presents a need for private arbitration for conflicts, where we don't have a party who has a monopoly of force, and there's the inherent conflict of interest between the one making the judgment and the one bringing the claims. If they're on the same team, that's a textbook definition of conflict of interest. And in every case where you have a state judge and a state prosecutor, how could you walk away from that and say that that's not a conflict of interest? So, for people who do get, violations thrown out where there are maybe a victim or there is some form of damage, that's unfortunate, but that's also a byproduct of having a system of violence, a monopoly on violence, administering justice. I mean, does anyone not see the oxymoron in that, or a little bit of the irony? So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I would throw out one other legal thing here, because they try to say that even though they work for the same group or the same company, they're separate. And when you look at, when you disqualify an attorney, we just say, it's a business case, so, it's business litigation. If you disqualify an attorney from the firm, you disqualify the entire firm. But that same principle doesn't carry over when the prosecutor and the judge are working for the same company.
That's it. Pointing out the inconsistencies and exploiting that.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's what, if you wanted to say in a nutshell, that's a good way to explain why I've had success and so many others like you have been able to replicate it, because you're pointing out the inconsistency.
And it's not hard to do when you know which questions are effective and which ones are less effective.
Yeah.
So winding things down here, Marc, are there any major turning points that have affected your work? And what would you say are your most effective achievements in the body of work that you've done? Would it be the traffic study, analyzing the effectiveness of asking these questions? What were the turning points and successes that you would find most successful to highlight?
I think the call to shames would probably be the top as far as educating and empowering people to defend themselves. And I know that because people have told me. They got the most views too, and people would post them. Oh, you see, this is somebody from Libertopia. Dude, I'm really sorry. All I can say is Rick, because I'm completely drawing a blank on your name. But I called him Rick because he looked just like Rick Grimes. But he is in the videos for for Libertopia, where you're in those also, Calvin.
I'm trying to remember his name too. It starts with a D, maybe. Geez, now that's going to drive me insane. But anyhow,
Rick knows who he is.
It's Rick. Yeah, he's called on the show a few times on the radio as well.
Oh yeah. Well, he would mirror my call of shames.
Oh yeah.
Get 5, 10, 15,000 plus views, which was great.
Well, because he would do it in such a way that the graphics, he would rotate graphics to reflect, and usually they're humorous, to reflect the absurdities that were coming out of the state's mouth. So he got a lot of good traction with that.
Yeah, I started doing that for a while, but I appreciate it. So I'm glad that came out. So no offense, he never took any when I called him Rick, and I wish if I go check out on my website, if you just on my YouTube channel, which is No State Project, you can just look up Libertopia and you can see all the videos that we did at Libertopia, and you'll see, and I'll use his real name. There's so many people to thank. It's you can't get everybody, but I do want to point out too, thank the people at striketheroot.com for actually posting my articles, where no other libertarian or anarchist site would post my articles, but Strike the Root would. So I'm glad I remembered that.
That's a lot of street cred right there for them. So yeah, thank you, Strike the Root.
Yeah.
So Marc, what now? I know you're on to other business ventures. Are you do you plan on staying active in the freedom community in any form? And if so, where can people interact with you? You mentioned that your markstevens@mail.com address will still be maintained and active in the future. Could people find you on Twitter? Is there any social media where people could interact with you? And again, do you plan on being active in the community as far as any speaking engagements?
As much as I can. Like I said, I want to go to Libertopia. It's easier for me to go to Jackalope. I still want to go to Jackalope. So, if the things like that, I certainly, if I had the opportunity and I'm able to go, I will do that. The website is going to be migrated somewhere. We're going to keep the forum, so I can still be active on the forum. I still have Frank Rizzo 3, which on Skype, and then we have the No State Project chat, although I probably have to set up a moderator for that. And there's Facebook. I'll still use Facebook.
There we have it. So you're not just falling back into the ether. You're still here. And I look forward to maybe some appearances in the future, maybe on other people's show or whatnot, with any type of nuanced information or any insights that you have from your very unique perspective on freedom and anarchism. So I look forward to that. And people who are also interested could follow Marc on those channels. And I'm sure if you're going to be making an appearance or if you line up some sort of engagement, it will be posted there on any of those varying channels. So we'll do what we can to get the word out when news comes around, because Marc, I got to say, your voice is a very unique voice in the community, and it shouldn't be lost entirely. I think your radio show has successfully served its purpose. I think the core objectives of what you set forth, essentially questioning whether or not the state is real or whether they are just a castle made in sand, I think, the roads that you've traveled down and the logic and the investigation and the fact finding missions that you've done over the years have gone a long way to prove your unique perspective in the freedom community and anarchist community that you really don't see too many other people zeroing in on. So a lot of respect for your approach in how you've come to your conclusions and your theories that have been tested and we can now draw conclusions from. I just want to say thank you for everything you put out there, and I want to emphasize that I think the project in its entirety and its life cycle has been successful. So any closing thoughts as far as the breadth of your work, anything you would like to add?
Well, I appreciate that, Calvin. We've worked close together for a while now, and it's, I do appreciate that. And it was a good run. I didn't envision this happening, but, after last year and getting attacked and, I think you're right. The show served its purpose. There's a lot of material there. People can always go back. It's not going anywhere. My site might be moving, but my YouTube channel's not going anywhere. I might still, if people want me to talk about it, and it's, we can nail the time down like we did here today. I'm happy to do other shows if there's interest for that. So I'm really in a bad spot, and it's been a horrific year so far. And so I'm doing what I can to build another business. And once that starts taking off, then I'll have a little more time, free time to actually engage in more activism. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I hope something manifests from that in the future, Marc. And I just want to say, well, it won't be a final time. It certainly isn't going to be the last time I say this, but as far as within the construct of the No State Project show, no product or service should be provided at the barrel of a gun. And I think that's something that you've put forth and you've driven very well. And that principle has been solidified. And there are a few takeaways you could bring from your show, but that is one essential one that has really stuck with me over the years, and why I have focused in on all interaction should be voluntary. It's really solidified my position as a voluntarist. So that's one thing I wanted to share. And there's many other sayings that have come from your show, but that was one that has really stuck with me over the years, that no product or service ought to be provided at the barrel of a gun. And that's kind of hard to argue against. So it's a very powerful principle to have on your side when you're engaging with people on how society ought to be organized and executed. I know there's probably a few meanings within that adjective in and of itself, but in any case, I really appreciate everything you've brought to the forefront of people's minds, the meaningful principles at play, and helped demonstrate which principles are fluff, which are all curtain to obfuscate what's going on behind the curtain. So you've served a tremendous purpose within the community as far as establishing a basis of principles to move forward with, to support their philosophy and their ethics. And I think the fallout from your work is going to be long lasting, and it's going to age very beautifully.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Calvin. This has been, I'm glad we did this. I hadn't planned it, but I'm glad that you got in contact with me and we did this. And hopefully, think that there'll be a much brighter future for everyone. It's a pretty dark time right now. And so I'm hoping things will turn a corner soon. But I appreciate this. And I guess what I can say, at least for the No State Project concerns, this can be my final salute.